war in Ukraine has sounded alarm bells across Europe. In the Baltics and Scandinavia, countries are on high alert. After decades, national security concerns have pushed Sweden to apply for NATO membership. We sit down with the country's newly elected Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, to discuss NATO membership, the war in Ukraine, and his new administration. I'm Yusuf Aram, and you're watching One on One. Your Excellency, thank you for joining us on One on One. Now, it's been 8 months since the war in Ukraine started. How do you evaluate Sweden and the European Union's reaction to the events in Ukraine, to Russia's invasion, sanctions that have been placed on Russia? Is it sufficient? Has Sweden and Europe done enough?
Well, I don't think anybody could say they have done enough, obviously, but I think Sweden and the European Union and the West basically has been surprising the world, being united, being strong in condemning the war, in helping Ukraine in all the sanctions. So I think basically we have proven that when things really are bad, the West and the European Union stick together and do the right thing. And I think that is a strong message to Ukraine. It's a strong message to Russia as well. So given the fact that the war is still going on, we see disastrous things every day. But nevertheless, I think the West and Europe is committed to help Ukraine.
Do you feel the war has been unifying or divisive for the European Union?
Well, honestly, it's not. I mean, my thoughts and my heart is more with Ukraine than with the European Union in these matters. But with no doubt, it has united us. Of course, everybody realized that Russia would like to break that unity and to split. Of course, but I think they haven't succeeded so far. I think we need to be very committed also in the long term. Europe needs to convince the US that Europe is doing our share of helping Ukraine. But, you know, the EU has been for the last years, the EU has been forced to engage a lot in crisis management for the last year. The pandemic, now the war, and of course the EU needs to do other things as well. We had the climate conference is going on right now. It's obvious that combating climate change is one of these long-term tasks. Improving the competitiveness in European economy is also these topics, and these tasks are equally important now as they were before the war. But the war takes so much of our attention for very good reasons.
It's definitely grabbing global headlines. Now, when Swedes are at home or at work watching TV, they're seeing visuals coming from Ukraine. They're seeing attacks against civilians, against infrastructure. They're seeing the death and destruction and devastation. What are Swedes thinking? Is this war far away in a far off land? Or is this something where they're thinking we could be next?
Basically, Swedes think so. I think all Scandinavians think so. Our friends in the Baltic states, they think so. So basically, this is very nearby. It is very nearby. I mean, we are talking about kilometers, basically, even though quite a few kilometers, but you know, by air, it's very, very nearby. So we feel strongly with them, as you normally do when really bad things happen to neighbors. So in that sense, there is a huge willingness to help in very many senses. But the other reaction is also we need to protect ourselves better, simply. We have been neutral or without any military alliances for a couple of 100 years. And suddenly and finally, we, in a very broad unity, with a broad majority in Sweden, we made a decision to join NATO. So we sent in the application this May together with Finland. That's another consequence, but it is also a consequence where Swedes realize that we might need help for our security when there is a war going on in our neighborhood. But that also means that Sweden needs to be prepared and to be able to help ourselves, to protect ourselves, but also be prepared to help others within the alliance. I think this is it's a kind of a mental shift in how we look upon defense and common security.
Aside from the fighting on Ukrainian territory, there's been a lot of secondary ramifications, secondary impact that has far-reaching implications. We're seeing now a global food crisis emerging throughout the world, a grain corridor deal that helped alleviate it somewhat. We're also seeing an energy crisis, energy shortage. We're reading it every day in the headlines, especially with Europe. Now, winter's coming. I was looking at the weather report, and Stockholm's already dipped to the single digits, so that long winter is coming. Yes. Is Sweden ready for the winter from an energy perspective, from a food stock perspective? Is Europe ready?
Well, yes and no. I would say I attended my first European Council meeting the other week, and obviously there is a lot of different views on how to solve the energy crisis, depending on how dependent different countries are on Russian gas, for example. But the common denominator is that every country is affected with higher prices. That goes for Sweden as well. Part of the problem in Sweden is actually self-created. We have turned off a lot of our nuclear power capabilities for the last 10, 15 years, and that was a bad decision. We shouldn't have done that. We should have kept them. We should have built more. Now we are rapidly reshaping our energy policies in Sweden, but it takes time, of course. The other part of the problem is created by the war, much higher prices for gas supply, and thereby also higher prices for the electricity which is produced from gas. So this problem will hurt everybody. Sweden is not among the countries most badly hurt, I have to say that, but still we have prices for electricity in southern Sweden that prices that are times higher than they used to be, and that affects households, that affects companies, that affects the competitiveness, of course, and this in addition to other economic problems with high inflation, raising rates. So we are into a very, very tough winter, yes.
Now, the reemergence of the Russian threat, it's raised security concerns in your country. And as you said, fighting can be measured in kilometers away from Sweden. This prompted a decision to apply for NATO membership. Now, what is Sweden's expectations from NATO, and what does Stockholm bring to the table for the alliance?
That's a good question. I'm very, very honest here. Our expectation is, of course, that we, as other allies, realize that we need to help each other. We may need other countries' help when there is a war going on, and that we cannot rely on ourselves any longer. I personally think we should have drawn that conclusion years ago, but, well, it's good we end up in that conclusion right now. The other equally important conclusion is that Sweden is prepared to do our part of the job militarily. That is, we want to be a security provider. We have capabilities, abilities, and competencies that we bring to the table in air, our fighters, underwater, our submarines, high-tech radars. We have quite a lot of capabilities in a military sense that we believe, without bragging, will be for good common use as well. That is one part. And the other part is fighting terrorism, realizing that there are other risks than pure military risks, and NATO's second pillar now is actually to help each other to fight terrorism as well. That was one of the key issues I brought to the table here in Ankara, of course, that Sweden is very committed to take our part in fighting terror, fighting organized crime, fighting those who try to finance terrorist organizations. So we have a kind of a 360 degrees perspective on this. We want to be a full part of it with no reservations. Not because we think we are better than others or that we are a very big country, because we are not, but we have edge in our competences.
Now, part of becoming a NATO member obviously requires unanimous approval, and Türkiye, a NATO ally, has had national security concerns, citing the presence of people linked to terrorist groups, terrorist propaganda inside Sweden and Finland, and a last-minute memorandum signing at the Madrid summit opened the door for membership. Now, part of that memorandum, there was some promises made. Do you think your administration could deliver on those promises?
Well, not only my administration. There is a very, very broad consensus in Swedish politics. Some 90% of parliament is behind our application, is behind the memorandum. So in these matters, there is a continuity from the former government into my government. Then we have a chance to even more stress new legislation, new initiatives we are taking. We stress even more that fighting crime and fighting those who come to Sweden simply to misuse hospitality for example, financing terrorism. They are really not here for reasons that we accept. So there is a chance also to do even more. But these were exactly the things we discussed today, and we are fully committed to fulfill all our obligations regarding the trilateral, as we call it, between Türkiye and Sweden and Finland. That's what we are doing right now.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan was one of the first people actually comment about you after you got elected and you're newly elected. And one of the things he said is, he strikes me as a man that's very tough on terror and has a strong stance against terrorists. Now, do you feel that you can do a better job, though, than the previous administration? Because the previous administration, it seems, was not able to live up to the expectations of Ankara. And they seem a lot more optimistic with you.
Well, there might be a more optimistic tone, and if that is so, then that's something I really appreciate, but I won't interpret or try to judge that at all. We fully respect that it is Türkiye that make Turkish decisions. We fully respect that. They do it as all the 29 other members of NATO do their decision making. So I rather stress the fact that there is a continuity. I stress the fact that there is a very broad political majority behind this, and also the fact that there is an extremely broad majority already within the NATO countries that actually would like to see us as members. So I think I settle with that so far, and I think I have done today what I could do right now to perhaps not convince, but to underline that we are really doing all the things we said we were going to do within the framework of the memorandum.
Now, one of the major arguments from the Turkish side was terrorist propaganda and their ability to assemble. One of the concerns was that they can use this as a recruiting tool in Finland and Sweden. The counter argument was freedom of speech. Where is the line in your mind between where freedom of speech becomes terrorist propaganda or recruiting tool? Where do you draw the line in your mind?
Well, it's really not for me to draw the line, because these are legal issues as well. The legislation is on my behalf. That's my responsibility, and therefore we now will introduce new legislation. We even change our constitution, literally, to be able to enforce new legislation that is much tougher on terrorist organization, prohibiting participating participating in terrorist organization, not only criminal, not only making it criminal to act in terrorist organization, but actually to take part of them. That's new legislation that will make it tougher for them to be present in Sweden, which is the purpose of the legislation. So that's our. And then Sweden we have courts that make all the decisions in every single case, and that's the way it should be. So it's not my job to tell in single cases, but it's my job to see for that we have a majority in Sweden behind efficient legislation that really makes the job of not letting Sweden become a safe haven for people who have links to terrorists or act within terrorist organizations.
When you were elected, did you feel the pressure of the responsibility that voters expect you to be the leader to bring Sweden into the transatlantic alliance? Do you feel that was a major issue with voters, that they thought you could be the man to lead Sweden into NATO?
Honestly, I would not over-exaggerate my personal importance for that, because we have this broad majority. We made an agreement between my party and other pro-NATO parties before the last election, and the then government, who used to be against but changed their mind, and that created the foundation where we had some 90% majority for this application. And for me, that's important. This is a decision of huge national security interest in Sweden, and for me it's important to keep it that way. But I guess quite a few voters know the fact that me and my party has been in favor of a NATO membership for decades. So of course that perhaps gives them confidence in that we will do everything we can within legislation, within this unity, to really bring Sweden to the table and become a full member of NATO.
The general consensus among Turkish foreign policy experts is that Finland's accession process is much less problematic than Sweden's, and if Finland had applied solely, that Türkiye would most likely have accepted and approved its bid by now, and that the delay is because of national security concerns regarding Sweden, and that both countries are applying together. Do you also feel a responsibility to the Finnish people as well to be able to get this bid through and also help them become members as well?
Well, I won't take part of any interpretations between Finland and Sweden from other countries' side, but I do feel a very strong solidarity and loyalty between Sweden and Finland. We made the application hand in hand. We will do this journey hand in hand, and we have no other ambitions than becoming NATO members hand in hand. And honestly, that is also the way I perceive that other NATO countries see our application. So we stick together, and we will continue to do that.
Now, before you came to Ankara, you were in Sharm el-Sheikh for the COP27 meeting. What were the main issues that you were stressing while you were there with your international counterparts?
Well, to use two words, we used the word urgency. It is urgent to make a difference. It's urgent to make the decisions that can bring down climate change and to make the world a better place, also in terms of climate and environment. And the other word we chose to use was actually possibilities, and there are really possibilities in this change. So we try to urge countries and companies and people not only to see this as something you have to do, because you have to, but also something that brings possibilities in terms of new business opportunities, for better lives, I mean, when you talk to many companies who are deeply engaged in the electrification of industry, of transportation, they see mainly possibilities in this. So I think the mindset that the world is changing, we need to change but there is also a lot of possibilities within this change. And of course, there is a national narrative for us as well. Many of our industries and individual companies are very well kind of positioned for this transition. And I would like the Swedish government and Swedish companies to join together, politics delivering good preconditions, regulatory if that is needed, otherwise good preconditions in terms of education, in terms of industry preconditions. But we need the companies, the spirit of innovation, all that, that politics simply cannot deliver. So we need to go hand in hand also in that sense.
One last question. You're a new administration. What is going to be your main focus during your term, and how do you differ from the previous administration? What are you bringing to the table that's different?
Basically, we got a mandate for change, and we will use it. That's the very simple answer. We got a mandate from the voters to change, fight crimes, to improve integration among immigrants who have come to Sweden, but still they don't work, perhaps live in suburbs with very severe integration problems, but also in terms of the economy, in terms of defense, quite a few big topics where the former government simply failed to change what needed to be changed, and simply they seemed too content with a bad development. My government is not. We are committed to change. We are humble in the sense that we realize this is difficult. Had it been simple, someone else could have done it. So we realize that it will take time, but it is doable, it's possible. So we will, with a steady hand and piece by piece, step by step, do all the changes that is needed in Sweden. And we think that will require quite some years under the same government, with the same dedication and with the same commitment. But that's our promise to the voters. And I think they trust our ambition, and then it's up to us to prove that we are worth their trust again, because this will not be solved during one short 4-year term. It will take more time, but we need to earn the support to continue what we have started.
Best of luck to you in your administration and also on your NATO accession bid. Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, thank you for joining us on One on One.
Thanks.